Let's start by picturing a classic hero's journey. But, our hero isn't a person at all. It's just a simple, everyday WhatsApp message. Picture this. You're sitting in a coffee shop in London. You type out a quick text to a friend, and boom, you press send with your thumb. Almost instantly, literally halfway across the world, a phone screen lights up in Tokyo with your exact words. Between your thumb pressing that glass and that little notification ping, your message just completed an absolutely epic intercontinental trek. It navigated through dozens of computers, plunged straight into the dark depths of the ocean, and bounced back up, moving at pretty much the speed of light. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this invisible miracle actually happens.
And honestly, what's truly staggering here is the time frame. 300. That is the magic number of milliseconds it takes for this entire journey to happen. We're talking less than a third of a single second. To put that into perspective for you, just a literal blink of a human eye takes about 300 to 400 milliseconds. So in the exact time it takes you to blink, your digital data has completely traversed the globe. So obviously, the natural question here is how? How does it happen so incredibly fast? How is it physically and technologically possible for something to move across thousands of miles with such flawless precision? Well, let's pull back the curtain and break down this invisible infrastructure step by step.
Okay, first things first. It all starts with directions. Before a message can even think about traveling, it needs to know exactly where it's going. Enter DNS, or the Domain Name System. Think of it as the internet's master phone book. It instantly translates human-friendly domain names into actual numerical IP addresses. But in our 300-millisecond journey, this lookup has to happen almost instantly. It relies on these incredibly fast, localized recursive resolvers, so your phone knows exactly where to route the message without eating up any of that precious time.
And speaking of those addresses, since every single connected device out there demands a unique IP address, we actually blew right past the original 4 billion slots we had with IPv4. The solution? We shifted to IPv6. This expanded our routing capacity to literal trillions. That means even as the web continues to scale infinitely, your specific message can still find that one exact unique device out of billions.
All right, so we've got the address, but here is where things get really wild. Your message? It doesn't get sent as one big continuous lump. Instead, a process called packet switching shatters it into tiny IP-labeled shards. And the craziest part is that these packets don't even travel together. They completely scatter. They take entirely different global routes to bypass traffic jams, only to perfectly reassemble themselves the exact millisecond they hit your friend's phone in Tokyo.
Now, we tend to casually talk about the internet as this invisible, floating cloud, right? But the physical layer of all this is intensely tangible. Your initial wireless radio signal hits a router, pushes its way through copper lines, and is literally converted into pulses of light shooting through glass fiber optic cables. Your data is physically moving through matter all around us.
And when you ask people how a message physically gets from the UK to Japan, most of them just look up. They immediately think of satellites in space. But in reality, satellites handle barely 5% of international internet traffic. A staggering 95% of all our data, our videos, our messages, our banking info, it actually travels underwater, resting right down there on the ocean floor.
That underwater highway is massive. It stretches a mind-bending 1.3 million kilometers. We're talking about over 550 active undersea cable systems, stretching all across the globe. And here's a fun fact. These aren't some massive, indestructible pipelines either. Many of them are no thicker than your average garden hose. Yet, they are down there right now, beaming light pulses across the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, carrying literally the entire weight of human communication.
Okay, so our little packets are zooming through these underwater garden hoses. But how do they navigate the intersections? Well, at every single junction, routers rely on something called BGP, or Border Gateway Protocol, to make these split-second pathing decisions. They aren't just passively reading a label, they're actively calculating the absolute most efficient path through global autonomous systems in real time. A single message might bounce through a dozen routers across 3 continents before you've even fully lifted your thumb off the screen. And actually, you can map out this exact precision path yourself using a network tool called traceroute.
Now, throughout this whole journey, bandwidth basically dictates the volume of traffic, but latency is our true enemy. Because latency is bound by literal physics, it's limited by the speed of light traveling through glass. No matter how incredibly wide you make your data highway to accommodate more bandwidth, the actual physical distance from London to Tokyo dictates the absolute minimum millisecond delay your packet is going to experience.
So, what happens if a packet gets lost somewhere in the ocean or gets dropped at a really busy router? At the transport layer, A protocol called TCP demands flawless reassembly. It requires these confirmation handshakes that actually eat into our 300-millisecond budget just to guarantee your text arrives perfectly intact. Contrast that with UDP. UDP is like a delivery driver who sacrifices all guarantees for pure reckless speed. It drops packets instantly, which makes it absolutely perfect for things like live gaming or video streams, where having a missing frame is way better than dealing with a delayed one.
If this sounds like total chaos, don't worry, because it's all meticulously managed by the OSI framework. Instead of a messy free-for-all, your data steps cleanly down a strict 7-layer hierarchy. It goes from the software application layer, right there on your screen, down through transport and network routing, all the way until it hits those physical cables at the bottom. It's a true miracle of systematic engineering, all happening in mere microseconds.
And to keep this whole global network from just completely melting down under the immense weight of modern streaming, the internet relies super heavily on content delivery networks, or CDNs. Ever wonder why a 4K Netflix show loads instantly in Mumbai? It's not because the data is crossing the Pacific every time you hit play. It's actually being pulled from a localized CDN cache right down the street, which saves massive amounts of intercontinental bandwidth.
So, let's wrap this up with a thought that kind of brings it all together. The internet, which was originally born as an experimental military network called ARPANET, wasn't actually just designed for speed. It was fundamentally designed for resilience. The whole crazy concept of breaking messages into tiny packets and routing them independently, that was invented so that if a massive section of the network was destroyed, the remaining routers would simply find a new path right around the crater. Packet switching literally guarantees that no single point of failure can take down the whole system. It makes the internet a living, breathing, self-healing organism that routes around damage in milliseconds. And as our modern world becomes increasingly dependent on this underwater light-speed network, it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. The internet was designed to survive a nuclear strike. So, what will it survive next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I hope you never look at a simple WhatsApp message the same way again.